I know if I stand up, I will talk louder, and I will try to use my very big voice. So I was asked to talk about how LaCrosse County used American Rescue Plan dollars to help with funding some different services for people within the community. So when the Biden administration had billions of dollars in the bipartisan infrastructure law, then LaCrosse County with a lot of things. The county board basically decided what they wanted to spend that $22.9 million. So they put it into boxes, and you can see that sustainability, child care, and the economy, and tourism, infrastructure with a focus on aging, because our nursing home, one of our nursing homes, was having some issues with just being able to stay open. So the housing piece is what I'm going to focus on today. So we had two task forces. We had one task force for housing, and we talked about two different things. One was we didn't know what to call it, so we called it bridge housing for families and bridge housing for adults, because we know in LaCrosse County, we have a lot of families that are on shelters, so it's a way that we potentially help the families without rent hotel rooms or some other things. So we have a good partnership in that. So I'll talk a little bit about both of those things. And the other $3 million was for adult bridge housing. So for families, we took the route of partnering with a couple of local agencies, Catholic charities. Basically, that money is divided between the two of them. They are purchasing residents, homes for people, and then families are living there. And that is a 10-year agreement. And after 10 years, those residences will be the property of Catholic charities. So that's a way that LaCrosse County could utilize. And then the $3 million for adult bridge housing, we had all kinds of visions on what we thought that was going to be. We're going to build a building. The city of LaCrosse was very invested in doing some things. So we had lots of thoughts, tried some different things. And then for good or bad, our nursing home project, which we thought was going to cost $10 million to build, was going to be, I don't remember, $15 million, and we got a little nervous. So then we decided we were just going to remodel our current nursing home. If you look forward, this is what's currently happening in family bridge housing, so that's a great thing. And then before that's happening. So these are all the things that are going to be in which is our current nursing home on the south side of LaCrosse. So it's going to be an intergenerational day center, so there's going to be space for kids and adults to learn together. There's going to be a downsized nursing home, a community-based residential facility, crisis stabilization, and bridge housing programs. So this is the current setup of the nursing home. So we have all of these wings that historically would have been over a 300-bed nursing home. We don't have 300-bed nursing homes anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of the wings, this one right here, and it's going to end up being 10 studio apartments, so that there will be a way for people to get more permanent shelter. But we've come to realize is how are we going to be the people with the highest needs are going to be there. But we're not going to be staffed 24/7. So we've been working on that to try and figure out how to do that. But we couldn't have done it without the American Rescue Plan, because we would have never had $10 million to get into this project. The nursing home will basically take out loans for the other $10 million. But we would have never had that money. We would have never had the $3 million for family bridge housing that will help us with a couple of important, I'm going to say, types of customers within our community to be able to reduce the number of homeless people and families that are homeless, that kids can have some stability. I think I heard yesterday, it was in the previous slide, 38 kids have been in those homes. That's really nice. So that's it. So I really wanted to give a very broad overview of what the LaCrosse County did to try to help with in the scheme of things, it's a small number of people, but we think it's going to have long-term lasting effects, and really try to take that money and use it in a different way. And LaCrosse County was lucky enough that we didn't have to spend it on things like staffing or salaries or anything like that. So I feel pretty lucky that we were able to do it. And that I think is it. Unless there are questions, or if there's something else you want. Our mission is to by expanding access to affordable housing choices. Just want to throw out kind of an overall definition of affordable housing means that no household is spending more than 30% of their income in their housing costs, whether that's their rent payment or their mortgage payment, property taxes, and homeowners insurance. And then, of course, our strategic priorities are we put people first. We're building homes, building opportunities for the people of the state. We do what we were created to do and protect housing as a core human right. So I think I'm preaching to the choir when everybody knows we're at a housing shortage crisis at the state. We're short about 125,000 units of affordable rental housing in the state. This does not include single family housing. So this is just rentals. Next slide. Just to kind of summarize what we do as a housing authority, single family lending, this is some impact that we have. Last year we did almost $600 million in first mortgages, helping almost 3,000 people get into homes. We work with 138 lending partners across the state to provide mortgage loans. In commercial lending, we funded 23 developments in 14 different counties, which yielded almost 1,400 new affordable rental homes. And we also have a small grant program where we awarded $2 million to 50 organizations that support emergency and transitional housing for special needs populations. So again, we are the allocator of the state's housing tax credits. That is a subsidy to help build affordable rental housing. We do single family lending, which we just talked about affordable housing focus. But we do have 4 new loan programs. The beauty of these programs for rural communities right now is that if you live in a community of less than 10,000 people, the rate on these funds, creative products is 1%. If you develop senior housing, it's also 1%. So it's a really low cost layer that you can stack with other resources to help with affordable housing. So just really quick, so you don't have a lot of time, vacancy or vitality helps convert vacated commercial spaces into housing. Infrastructure access will help a developer install public infrastructure to serve affordable housing deals. Restore Main Street will help rehab second and third floor housing in main streets or downtown communities. And then the last one is more of a consumer base that helps consumers make necessary repairs to homes that are 40 years old. I'm here today to talk about a program I hope some of you know about. If you don't, please put this in your back pocket because this is an annual grant program that we offer every year on the Affordable Housing Grant Program. I put this slide up here because I feel like before I started working at the Federal Home Loan Bank, I was not familiar with what it was, and it confused even me. So there are a lot of Federal Home Loan Banks across the country. We cover Chicago, the state of Illinois, and the state of Wisconsin. That's within our district. People ask me all the time, is this federal money? Are you worried about it going away? No, we are individually capitalized. We are federally regulated, individually capitalized. So that should hopefully make you guys feel good that these fundings will continue. So this is the Affordable Housing Program overview. So every year, like I said, this program exists. Ours is about to open. The round opens May 12th. It closes June 20th. So if you know of anyone or if you know of nonprofit housing developers in your space, please let them know these dates. It's roughly for us the same time every year. So if you're thinking about you don't have a project this year, but you have something maybe in the future years, it's roughly always around this time where you submit your application before June, and we spend all summer reviewing the applications, and then around October is when we decision and let folks know who actually receives funding. So how the program works is it's forgivable grants up to $2 million and up to $50,000 now per unit, which is a change that's increased. And this can be for subsidized acquisition, construction, or rehab of affordable housing units. It's for rental and owner-occupied. I know this is rental specific, but if you have owner-occupied, it also qualifies. And how it works, and this is where some folks have questions, is because the Federal Home Loan Bank is a member cooperative, which means that it's a bank for banks. So local financial institutions are members of the Federal Home Loan Bank. So if you're a nonprofit housing developer, you partner with a member financial institution to submit an application to receive funding. I was just talking with someone who said, well, we don't know of anyone in our area who is a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank. That's okay. If that's your challenge, you have a great project that you think would fit the
these qualifications, but you don't have that member bank, please reach out to us and we can do some matchmaking to help you access that to submit the application. So basically you submit with a member bank and then we review them to score which ones this year made the qualifications. So this year it's up to $52 million. Last year was $48 million. So it's a lot of money that we goes to projects like yours across districts. So let's go to the next slide. Here are some requirements. So for owner-occupied housing, you know, again, with household income, 8% AMI, and then rental, 20% of units have to be 50% AMI. Retention is important to note because once you receive this grant, there is retention of agreements that go into it. So for owner-occupied housing, it's a 5-year retention, rentals 15 years. And so it's a 100-point scoring system. Highest scored projects are awarded until all funds are committed. These are some of the priorities that go into it. This year we have some updated categories, which actually, if you go to the next slide, kind of outlines how the scoring works. So organizations who become familiar with applying to this program do something called self-scoring, where they can go through and they know roughly where they're going to land for that year's program. What I will say is if you have a project, whether it's a rental or an owner-occupied, that you think would really meet all these categories, but before you go through the headache of actually submitting an application and you want to do a gut check, we have a team of individuals with full-time jobs to do technical assistance. So if you have a project and you just want to talk to someone and be like, do you think this qualifies? Am I scoring this properly? Please, I'm here and I have cards and I'm happy to give them to folks, or we have a general email box. Please reach out. We're not wasting people's time. People would much rather meet with you and work on a project prior to submitting an application. So I really encourage everyone to connect with our team of experts who do this. And there's a ton of resources that are on our website. I think all these slides are going out to you guys as well, so you'll have access to all of this. But if you have any questions about this program, we had two webinars last week that are recorded, so you can also listen to those webinars to actually get that more in kind of understanding of this program. But because it's a predictable grant, it's just a great opportunity if you're trying to put together your capital stack, and this can be one of those funding sources to get your awesome projects to the finish line. Thank you.
I'm a community development specialist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. And our district includes a good chunk of the Midwest. It's all of Iowa and portions or majorities of Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and of course, Michigan too. And so what we do and why we care about housing is because of something that we call the rural mandate. Number one, it's to maximize employment, and then also, secondly, to maintain price stability. And we know that housing impacts are these ties to both of those things, whether it's your inability or struggles to attract a workforce to your community, whether it's like the lack of contractors to build housing in the first place, or even like the rising costs that we've seen. And we know that's not just in rural communities and urban communities alike. It's like across the country, basically. Everyone's struggling with that, with rising rents and home prices. And so what we've done over the past, you can go to the next slide here. What we've done over the past couple of years, especially and are ramping up now, is our engagement with communities, sort of like on the ground work to understand what the housing dynamics are so that our leadership can make decisions that are in the best interest of that dual mandate, or at least to achieve that dual mandate. And what that looks like are calls with communities, housing organizations, nonprofits, you name it, economic developers as well, who are now increasingly looking at housing as part of their work to understand the dynamics. Maria, it's great to see you on this panel because you are aware of this as a former member of our advisory council. She was on our rural steering committee as well. I believe someone else here, Brett White, is on our upcoming advisory council. So really trying to hear from folks. What's that? Hey, there you are. And so we want to hear from y'all as well. And I think some of the things that we come across, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody working on housing in particular, but it has to do with things like capacity constraints in rural communities, like having a city clerk there who does a great job, but is overburdened with all that work, right? And like doesn't have that financial or financing background or experience or education to like sort of pencil in these deals. It's the need for massive funding stacks and combining like different sources of financing and so forth, attracting contractors to your community, that sort of thing. We often hear about why communities that are stable in population are maybe like stagnant and losing people. Not every place is losing people, but some are. Why would you have a housing crisis in places like that if you have people leaving, but then you don't get at the type of housing or the age of housing or the condition of housing, things like that. So again, none of these are new to y'all. We'll go through them, I'm sure, in the Q&A too. But we also have an awareness of what communities are doing, what they're working on, and how they're doing things like preparing land. Like used to be, you would think of site readiness in terms of economic development to attract these large industries in. Communities are increasingly thinking about site readiness for housing. We see local folks like putting up their own incentives, even for home buyers, like direct cash to home buyers to attract them, things like that. Some really great solutions, but I'll read those into the Q&A just for the sake of time. I'll say I don't have a program to share with y'all or anything like that, but in terms of information, I'd love to connect with anybody here who works in the space and really learn about housing and how it's affecting your community or the other community and economic development issues that you're facing. So just appreciate your time. We'll go to Q&A. Thank you.
Solutions. We are a developer. My degree, I always start with what my degree is because it's not anything to do with developing. It's health education. And my wife's degree is in psychology. And what we're passionate about the company is building properties within communities that affect the long-term health of the community. And what does community health look like? And so that's kind of where we come from. And so I'm just going to take the things that we look at from the developer's perspective when we're putting the financial layers together. And we have a saying in our office: control the controllables. Here's what we can't control. So we identify this thing. We can't necessarily control the community. The things we can partially control is the income to expense ratio, meaning how we build buildings affects the future long-term operating costs. How we design buildings affects our overall construction costs. For example, if we put a 10-foot common hallway down the center of the building, or you choose to use exterior entrances with no common hallway, those are two different cost propositions and two different outcomes from a performance standpoint. Entitlement costs. We can partially control entitlement costs. However, in our business, entitlement cost is roughly 30% of the cost. So what are the controls? How we design a building? This one I think is critical to the financial layers, which is collaboration and thinking outside the box. Every project we need to have a whole layer capital stack in order to get it done. And then as a community, we always find out what the community has to box to affect that development, make it happen. Next slide. Two very quick examples. This is a public-private partnership. It's funny. This project in the upper right is a collaborative project with the city of Richmond. They catalyzed this housing development. We created $140,000 in tax base, which was a benefit to the library. And then we also did townhomes on the project, and it's right in their center of the core, which catalyzes their historic small downtown. Next slide. This is a project in Ross, Wisconsin. Right across the street from it is Mayo Clinic. Mayo owned this land, and they sold the land to us on the project. Just 24 studios, 12 townhomes, community garden. When we bought the property, we donated 2 lots to Habitat for Humanity. We were serving a very specific community need. What were one of the financial layers on this? In order for us to do 24-unit building, we were most likely going to need future employees, male hires, 15 new employees every month, 180 a year, a lot of them just out of school. In order to catalyze that thing, so it's all those little pieces layered together from a design standpoint that actually help those financial layers, which would typically do that in successful projects.
To ask our panelists here today. So we often hear how rural communities are different than urban communities. You guys talked a little bit about using data trends and community needs to influence strategic development. You go for it. You look motivated.
And we say this all the time in our business. We are not the customer. I am absolutely not the customer of our product. If I think and look through that lens, we're going to fail every time. I would go a 6,000 foot garage and an 850 square foot home. That would be me as a customer. The reality is, in the community I live, 72% of the homes are one person and two person homes. In the state of Wisconsin, it's 30% of homes are one person homes. 26% nationally. That trend is increasing, which says size of boxes matter, and that affects the economic piece of this. That 24 unit project that was up there, those are 350 square feet, but they have a design style called Ori, so all the beds mechanically, by pushing a button, raise up to the ceiling. So you're basically getting about 650 square feet of living space in a 300-foot box, which allows us to penetrate the market at about $1,100 a month. So if you're a young professional just starting a job, it works for their income to expense ratio for housing. So that data does matter. We follow that data a lot. We realize we are absolutely not the customer.
Can you talk about where you get that data from? So, like, do you expect the community to have that ready for you? Do you guys have a due diligence process? Can you talk us through that?
So, two or three different places. One, we spend time just researching. We pay $1,000 a month for data just to help us out. So, a lot of times we get housing reports from the community. We already have the data from the community. But it is certainly helpful. I think the other piece of that is, what is the vision of the community? And do they follow the vision? For example, the community has a comprehensive plan. And the plan, that comprehensive plan is all the community saying, this is where we want to grow up to be. As a developer, we follow that. So I think having those plans are critical. So it's community-based planning that's already happened. It's outside secondary resources for getting at that. Policy. An article.
Does anyone else want to chime in? I was just going to say, when looking at data can really, like, you can kind of manipulate data to fit really the story that you want to tell. But really having communities that are looking at like a large picture of data, not just this is the housing that we have now, this is our population, but looking at how many jobs do the employers in your community have open? How many commuters are coming into your community to work? How far are they traveling? Is your school district growing, or is it staying stagnant, or is it shrinking? And using all of those resources to really fit that narrative and building it into, like Marvin said, like a housing study or a comprehensive plan to really look at housing as not just a one-size-fits-all approach, but looking at the big picture and utilizing those data trends.
I'll add, maybe the University of Wisconsin Extension Office has something similar to this. I'm not entirely sure, but I was just in Iowa recently in Ames. Your counterpart there, the Iowa State University Extension Office held a conference on housing, and they conduct what's called a rural housing readiness assessment in communities throughout the state. But they are very selective about who they work with because they want to see local leaders and so forth kind of get together and have these partnerships ready to go and be serious about housing development. But the data that we're looking at, the type of housing, who really wants to live in the community? Why are they having challenges attracting certain types of professionals and so forth? And all of that goes into your policy making and your objectives, because maybe your zoning is disallowing for certain types of development. Or maybe you have a rehabilitation, maybe you actually have a lot of housing units, and they're just really old and need repair. And so having that sort of awareness and thinking about readiness itself can help you, aim your policy goals a little bit more accurately, more precisely. So I'll just add that.
Okay, all right, we'll move on to our next question. So you guys talked a little bit about some of the programs each of your organizations either offer or see utilized in capital stacks. Are there any other programs or funding types that you often wish people knew about to utilize when they're trying trying to construct workforce, senior, or other multifamily housing. I cannot chime in just looking at the different kind of housing projects that we see through Arvita, primarily talking about housing tax credit projects. Many times there's not just 2 to 3 sources of capital in those deals. Sometimes there's 7, sometimes there's 8, or maybe more. So utilizing, funds from, AHP funds or home funds, utilizing tax credit equity, TIP is a huge resource. All of those layering stacks, the new programs I mentioned, especially infrastructure access and vacancy to vitality, those can be paired with housing tax credits as well. So just, I know we're going to talk about some challenges, and I think Dustin mentioned the technical capacity of the municipality is trying to keep all of those things straight. And also, when the applications are due for certain funding streams and all that can be really challenging. So leaning on the partners and the relationships that you build to try to help you navigate, because we're all resources that can really be there to answer questions, connect you with the right people, and try to get you to, layer those stacks. Also utilizing things from the community resources. I know Polycap's doing some really cool solar projects to cut down on energy costs. So there's a lot of stuff that can be researched for those projects.
So most communities have folks with resources that want to see their community be very successful. So it's just having those critical conversations with them. And most people like security and tax. Revenue is pretty secure for them. And so they can drive by it, they can see it, they can touch it, know that they were part of it, and they're making a little more money. So it's very easy to solve it.
Anyone else want to try in this question? Okay. So I'm going to shift this next question a little bit. If you had your crystal ball, right, and you had to kind of predict some of the gaps or barriers or changes in funding for housing over the next 5 years, I think there are already gaps and barriers that exist to funding for these projects. We're seeing a shifting federal landscape. So what are some of your predictions about those gaps and barriers moving forward and where communities can need additional support?
Yeah. A colleague and I are looking at the LIHTC program, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It's pretty generous in terms of one of the credits can be up to 9% for the creation of new affordable housing stock. And then in turn, those units are guaranteed affordable for 15 years for the compliance period, usually another 15 years for an extended use period. This program, it came into law in 1986. A lot of the units that came online in 1990. And so we're starting to get to this point where those earliest LIHTC units are approaching the end of their affordability restrictions. And so now there's going to be this wave of these units that are losing guaranteed affordability. I say guaranteed because it's tied to the subsidy. It doesn't necessarily mean that the market's going to make it unaffordable. But we're about to see this, a flood of units coming online or offline from the LIHTC program. And there's going to be questions about recapitalization and what do we do with these units. Now, on the whole, we're going to be adding LIHTC units each year too. And so on net, our prediction that we're going to publish here soon, our prediction is that really the net unit number of affordable units is going to pretty much remain stable. But it's these units that are falling offline that we're no longer tracking that we're going to have to worry about.
I can say for the affordable housing program I mentioned earlier, this is the annual program, and we have no idea, so not my good crystal ball predictor, how many applications we're going to receive this year. Because we can see a huge increase because we know a lot of funding is going away, or we can see a decrease because those projects will no longer be eligible. We need at least 50% of your funding sources already at time to apply to the program. So it will be interesting. Talk to me in 3 months, and I can tell you, are we seeing a ton more applications or not? I think that can be a predictor also I don't know if this is a prediction, but let's go back in time to 2019, and a person could purchase a really nice, moderate-sized home for around $200,000, $250,000, have an affordable mortgage. That was only 5-6 years ago. Now look at the average cost of a single-family home, and it's a small single-family home, and the rates, and it's just not attainable for a workforce household making 100% of unmediated income or less. So I think a prediction is that communities are going to have to get really creative in how they're creating new units of housing. We saw the data before, the very little tiny bars that showed how much housing was built in the last 5 years. It's almost non-existent in some areas. So trying to find ways to bring new housing online to meet the challenges of the increased costs, the increased interest rates, the uncertainty in the cost of materials and labor. So I know that there's a lot of great things happening, but that's just my thought is try to be creative and get new models of housing for the workforce.
I think the communities that are going to win this battle are actually the communities that develop a pipeline of efficiency.